Welcome to the Rangers Roost. My name is Tennyson E. Stead. I'm the creator of Jump Rangers. This is a weekly chat where we sit down, we talk about, I guess, basically whatever happens to be on my mind going into the week. We've talked about world building. We've talked a lot about ethics in entertainment. We've talked about the screenwriting process. Who am I? I'm a game developer. Obviously, I'm making Jump Rangers. I'm a working screenwriter. Most of my work in Hollywood is basically ghostwriting. I do script doctor work, which means I jump in and I fix other people's screenplays when there's a reason to fix them. And, usually when there's some kind of urgency, either because the writer wants to move their career forward or because there's a production happening. And Jump Rangers has been kind of a lifelong project of mine. And it started game design is something I actually got into very young. I just didn't realize I was doing it. I was doing role playing games before I knew what they were with my sister and my cousins in the woods, and they didn't particularly love the fact that I was constantly trying to make rules about how to play and that I was trying to create all these worlds and that I was trying to tell people what's real and what's not in the setting of whatever we were doing, and it didn't didn't mesh well with their idea of play. But I was always trying to create convincing worlds around myself, and I was always trying to tell stories in those worlds. And I was usually doing it through play, as opposed. I did a lot of writing as well, um, and and that's become kind of a full circle life goal of mine. When I moved out to Los Angeles, I had developed a tabletop role playing game called Restoration, which is about a group of time travelers that are trying to change history, and they have these bases in prehistory, so they can't be affected by time because when time changes, the effects move forward, and they send spies and commandos and scientists and infiltrators out on these missions to change certain things about history in order to ensure that humanity ends one day later than it did. Their goal is to try and save humanity one day at a time. The sort of conceit of restoration is that it's never actually going to be fixed. People are never going to be sustainable without help. But we can constantly be guiding and shaping the decisions that people make throughout history in order to buy another day. And every restoration mission that results in the end of humanity one day later than it did is a successful mission. So the restoration is constantly rewriting history to give people more longevity. It's an interesting game. I like it a lot. Jump Rangers is kind of the exact opposite. Restoration is very hard science fiction. The stakes are always very dire. Small mistakes can have big consequences. And these kinds of things, I need to go through and rework the game mechanics. There's some stuff in there that doesn't need to be there. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to make the game simpler and more enjoyable. And I think that a lot of those opportunities have been discovered in writing Jump Rangers. I think I need to go back through and rebuild the game with an eye for all the things that I've achieved since, um, and I will at some point. Um, we just got back from Phoenix. We were both sick, Hippie Looney and I, taking care of her mom's house while they went on a trip. Producer Lucinda Bruce on the Jump Rangers team is in town, which is nice. We expect her to be getting here any day. Um, it's an exciting time. I guess what I want to talk about here, I'm a little exhausted and a little bit sick, so if this is a little wandery, that explains it. I think I was explaining how I came by Jump Rangers. But restoration is something I was working on when I moved to Los Angeles. I started screenwriting because I had people ask me for the rights, and something inside me said it wasn't a good idea. So I learned to write the screenplay myself. And actually, Restoration was the first screenplay I wrote. And ever since then, I've been doing other stuff. So, um, when I wrote Restoration, I was working at a film company doing film finance. I started writing screenplays to sort of serve the people that I knew and the production abilities of the people that I knew. One thing led to another, and now I'm a script doctor. Um, and Jump Rangers is, I think, at the end, I've done a lot of things in this industry to sort of build myself out as an entrepreneur. I spent about 10 years trying to build a film company. I had some really great ideas about how Hollywood could be more sustainable, and I think that at the end of the day, what I ended up realizing was that um, because of the way people see creativity and the people see creative investments and all the sort of realities that I've been knocking my head up against, it was actually going to be easier for me to build a player base for something like Jump Rangers and provide the things that I want to provide to the industry by focusing on the stuff that brought me here in the first place. So everything kind of came full circle. Um, that's that's the story of where Jump Rangers came from. Specifically, the world building came from the fact that I was frustrated with the passive nature of kids' entertainment. I was actually walking out of a Harry Potter movie feeling very frustrated that someone's always giving Harry the mission, someone's always telling Harry exactly what to do, giving him something to focus on, and then giving him a sense of urgency about it. And I just had this thought of, we give the kids the wands, but we don't give them any authority, and how that felt incomplete and untrusting to me. And I wanted to offer something a little bit more substantial in terms of children's entertainment. I wanted to give them the wand and the authority. I wanted them to be the ones who decided what needed to be done and why it needed to be done. And I wanted the kids to be in a position where adults kind of had to respect that authority for some reason. And I'm not crazy about. I like fantasy. I enjoy fantasy. I love Lord of the Rings. I don't think I have anything to say about fantasy that hasn't been said. And science fiction is a much more appealing genre to me, and specifically, space fiction has always been something that captivates me. So I wanted to tell the story that I was telling in that kind of setting. And so the question became, why would kids have authority in a vast galaxy? Why would kids be able to tell adults their business, you know, in that vast setting? And that idea of a human diaspora and all of us being very small and being forced to adapt quickly and having those survival traits be kind of the best of us, or at least the strongest of us. I thought that was very compelling. So that's where Jump Rangers came from. And ever since then, it's been kind of about um, pulling things into the game that I want to see and that I want to play with, things that I think kids want to play with, and things that grown-ups want to play with, things ideas that we want to play with, themes, conflicts, but also just um, archetypes from science fiction. I think one of the fun things about Jump Rangers is that it's arguably very derivative. There's a lot of things that you recognize. We have living planets, we have space mice, we have a sense of military science fiction, we have dinosaurs with battle armor, we have giant robots. None of these things are in and of themselves unique to Jump Rangers by any stretch of the imagination. They're all archetypes. One of the things that I like to sort of point out is that void whales have these human colonies inside their gullets, these oil rig looking structures with people living there, coming and going. And that's just Pinocchio, but writ large with a post industrial aesthetic and taken with an equal level of seriousness. The relationship between the void whale and the colony that lives inside it is a real thing. You know, it's but what makes it distinct is the fact that we are seeing this through the eyes of kids with authority. These are children. They have a sense of wonder. They have a sense of awe. And there really isn't anybody who can tell them that that is invalid in some way. There's no way to take that away from them in this world because they are the ones people need help from. They're the ones that you have to sort of appease. They do have power because they're heroes. And that heroism means that there's only so much other people can afford to do to push them or challenge them into becoming less inspired or less what have you. So, in a lot of ways, Jump Rangers is an opportunity, I think, to take a second look at a lot of the things that people love about science fiction and a lot of the ideas that people have thought were cool over the years, and to recontextualize those things and very deliberately bring ourselves back to a sense of childhood without disrespecting the stakes of the world we live in today. Because one of the things that I think is important is that these kids do have to solve big problems. They do have responsibilities. It doesn't have to rob them of their childhood, but it does change their childhood. And I think that giving grown-ups and kids the opportunity to identify that reality is empowering. I think that we don't have to look at a healthy childhood as being the same childhood we had. There's a lot of things about the way we grew up that don't work in some capacity. Maybe it's because we weren't entirely honest with ourselves about who was paying for the privileges that we enjoyed. Maybe it was the fact that um, we were building up environmental debt and that debt was going to come crashing down on us and we overlooked that. There's frankly a lot of things we got told as kids that weren't true. And we got told those things for, in hindsight, relatively stupid reasons. And it's not that people didn't know. And I think that there's this temptation in society to take those concepts and ideas and kind of justify them as part of rearing kids, to take those lessons that we learned and those idioms that we were handed and say, well, that we were kids, we needed things to be that simple or that innocent or that this or that. And it wasn't simple and it wasn't innocent. It just wasn't true. And I think that for me, Jump Rangers is kind of a chance to reset and say, we don't have to say untrue things to raise kids happy and to raise kids well. We need to respect their sense of wonder. We have to respect their sense of joy and empower them to face down the realities of the world we're handing them. Because the wonder and the joy, if they don't lose those things by finding out that they were based in fantasy, the wonder and the joy can actually be tools that they can use to empower them to overcome those challenges. That's kind of a big idea that I didn't really realize I was sitting on. So that's interesting. My lips are chapped from being sick. So I apologize for the gruesome visage. Um, trying to think of when I was logging on, I was thinking I might talk a little bit about Star Citizen because I had a really interesting chat with Buster last week, and that's been on my mind. One of the interesting things about being a member of the Star Citizen community is that there's a lot of debate about to what extent um, Cloud Imperium Games is quote unquote a scam. There's people out there saying that the company isn't real and they're not really producing a game. The game is excellent. You can play it. Anybody who's making that argument is not paying attention to what's actually happening because there's so much on the screen, so to speak. The expense of what they've done is inarguably equal to or greater than the expense of what they've brought in terms of capital. So that side of it is ridiculous. Um, but there's a lot of ethical debates because there's so much controversy around the fact that it has taken more than a decade to make this game, which is fair. And at the same time, for me, and this is what Buster and I were talking about, the really not necessarily. There's a lot of fun things about Star Citizen for me. I love the game, but the thing that's really appealing to me on a show business level and on an ethical level is the fact that we're finally seeing somebody with a really considerable budget do things quote unquote the right way. We're seeing somebody take their time and address the problems that come up with the concept of what they're trying to do and deliver on what was originally promised, in spite of the fact that they have discovered overwhelming technical challenges, as well as a scope of work in general that probably wasn't anticipated when the project began. And they're just picking through the problems bit by bit and knocking them down until that goal is achieved. And as an autistic person, that requires a lot of patience. And then sometimes they've even made promises that they couldn't keep because they didn't understand what they were getting themselves into at the time. And it's actually very appealing to me that when they had that realization, they had a moment of accountability, they discussed it with the audience, and then they started working the problem. That to me is so much more rewarding than taking a shortcut or trying to find another way to satisfy. I mean, it's fine to find another way to satisfy the audience. That's not the problem. The problem is when you sort of try to, at that point, when you have that realization that it's going to take a lot of work and it's not as easy as you thought, to find some way to set a new expectation. That is what bothers me. Because just because the idea is going to take all this time and all this effort, that doesn't mean the idea isn't worth pursuing. And the truth is, the only reason, in my mind, people have huge problems with that timetable is because we have been trained to expect those compromises more than we are trained to expect how long it actually takes to do something this challenging. We see so many games come out and films come out that wound up cutting corners, that the corner cutting process has become institutionalized to such a degree that we panic when we don't see it as a reaction to problems. And in spite of the fact that they've encountered these huge challenges that they didn't expect, what I really love about CIG as the developers of Star Citizen is the fact that they have found ways of eliminating or at least checking that impulse to cut those corners. And, when it becomes clear to them that they have to make a choice between um, expediting something and finding a sustainable right way to do it, they have doubled down on the right way to do it every single time. To the extent that I think it's going to be really hard to make video games in 5 years without licensing software from CIG. They paid a lot of tech debt. They figured out how to do things that the games industry has been avoiding figuring out how to do because it takes too much time and too much effort. I'm not just talking about server meshing, which is kind of the back end technology that makes a high fidelity game of the scope of Star Citizen possible and which is just now going online. Star Citizen, if people aren't aware, is a high fidelity, meaning like it's a MMO, a space MMO with the level of detail of a Bethesda game, or more so. And with, in a sense, a reduced level of gameplay that you might find if you manage to take all the Microsoft simulators, the flight simulator, the farm simulator, all the simulators, and just pack them all into one game. They've they're not exploring quite as much depth as you would get from one of those games, but that's kind of the idea, and it's ambitious. They didn't realize how ambitious it was when they started, and they found out, and they've paid for that mistake 10 times over. But in the process, they have built systems of maintaining their resolve, and they built systems of communication with the player base, and they built systems of managing their own expectations that make it less and less of a problem that they are pursuing this goal. And in doing so, like I said, it's not just about the server technology, the server architecture that allows them to have thousands or maybe one day millions of players all on one shard in a world with that much detail and that much expansiveness, which they have now figured out. It's solved. It's just a question of debugging it to the point where they can actually play with it and developing it to the point where it does everything they need it to do. There's a lot of iteration that still needs to be done, but it's literally proven. You can see videos of it. And I've played it myself. Um, Apart from that, you know, they've got technology for how the audio works that nobody's ever seen before in games. They've got technology for how um, terrain generation works that nobody's ever seen before. because of the fidelity that they're trying to create and the sheer amount of work that they're trying to do, they have to develop all these different tools. And I think if these tools become available for licensing either to corporations or to individual game designers, I think these kinds of tools are going to give individual game designers the opportunity to create things that they never could have created without them. And I think it's going to set an expectation that is very hard to meet for other AAA studios. Once we see Squadron 42 come out, and once we see Star Citizen in its initial release, I don't know how they're going to meet those expectations unless CIG is willing to license the material, the software driving their product, unless they reverse engineer it. Because they literally have built institutions that depend on shortcuts and on resetting audiences' expectations or on managing their own expectations of what they're capable of to begin with as part of their core risk strategy, basically. And seeing something get built to me that approaches risk in a different way as an opportunity and that embraces the opportunity to create something that doesn't have the technology that it needs right up front by using the project's development as a platform for building all those tools. That's what George Lucas did with Star Wars. It's literally what he did with Star Wars, and then he wound up with Skywalker Sound, and he wound up with ILM, he wound up with THX, right? That's what Walt Disney did. And these are, to this day, some of the most sustainable entertainment institutions. How can you say that's not the right way to do things? It's clearly the right way to do things. And it makes me happy to see someone doing things the right way and getting away with it. So I have nothing but patience. And I like to take an opportunity when the subject comes up to sort of paint things in that light because um, to me it's really important that we all stay brave. And, not for nothing, that is what I hope to achieve with Jump Rangers. I don't necessarily want to develop new technology. I can't imagine a Jump Rangers video game as big as Star Citizen. Maybe I'll wind up working with somebody who can. I mean, the tabletop role playing game is as big as Star Citizen. It is. But how could that be in a computer game? That's not for me to say at the end of the day. I will build the world. I will develop the systems and develop gameplay that I think is fun to help develop that world. And then I'll write cartoons. I'll write movies. I'll do what I'm good at. I'll write a few novels along the way and use this as an opportunity to develop myself as a writer. I'll challenge myself to grow, and then other people will take the content and challenge themselves to grow. But I do want to develop systems of ethics. I want to develop systems of ethics that revisit our relationship with young and old audiences. I want content creators to take personal responsibility for the communities that they build. And that's another thing I see from CIG, by the way. And to some extent from Disney. More so than with other companies, at least. What is Disneyland if not a constantly rolling expo? It's an opportunity to meet with the audience and to engage with them personally as a company. And I guarantee that's why Walt built it. Same reason Comic-Con exists. Oh. And, you know, for me, that's the core of what makes Jump Rangers important, is the fact that we're playing with kids and we're letting the kids tell us what's right and wrong. Because kids know, actually. Kids have a whole lot of moral authority. They have a very innate sense of compassion and courage and fun and health. And it's because we haven't taught them to overlook the things that their body and their heart and their mind and their spirit are telling them. They don't know to do that yet. It hasn't been beaten out of them. And I think that teaching kids that we trust those elements of themselves and that they can learn things that allow them to use those tools more effectively instead of learning not to use those tools. That's powerful and important and beautiful. So that's kind of my server meshing. And I'm sure as Jump Rangers becomes more successful, I'll find I'll find other challenges. But for me, the people I work with and the opportunities I take advantage of and the relationships I build are going to be about finding those people who understand the core of what makes Jump Rangers good and important and worthy, and taking the time to make sure that those relationships are strong enough to expand on what I've built and what Jump Rangers is, as opposed to taking a shortcut and squandering the opportunity to do it right. I think that's probably about where I should stop. Um, we're not going to be doing. It turns out it's a holiday. I'm bad at holidays, but it's actually really good news because you know life is busy. I'm exhausted. I just got back from a trip, so we're not going to be doing the rookies today. But happy Memorial Day to everybody who's here. And I'll be back on Thursday. Something else to talk about is that I am thinking about restarting the um, the data deck files and writing new data deck files every week because the time is fast approaching when we are going to have some money for dice and I can start giving dice away to people who sign up for the Patreon, and I want to make sure that I retain them when I get them. So the data deck files is a good place to start. Signing on once a week and writing something new for Jump Rangers is a good idea. Um, is that something people would like to watch? Please let me know. This coffee, it's hard. It gets grimy in the bottom. It's got a cute little tin filter that sits on top, but it doesn't really stop the silt. Oh, that's it. Good talk. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Um, that's a good way to start the week. I appreciate anybody who's watching this. If you have questions, please ask either in the comments or You can find me on social media. You can find Jump Rangers on social media. Blue Sky is where I mostly live. There's a link tree down below if you want to find me. I'm on Mastodon. I'm on Instagram. Um, Instagram isn't as exciting as it will be when we have money. So, because that's going to be when we can really start paying for, weekly art. But I'm looking forward to posting all that on Instagram as it becomes available. In the meantime, there is engagement there. There's opportunities, and you'll see opportunities to say hi and ask questions and get involved. That's it. Time to log off. Thank you for watching. Uh, Tune in on Thursday, 5 p.m. Pacific time for Ranger Stories, and we'll read through a number of the data decks that we've already written. And don't be a stranger, Ranger.